Good afternoon, everybody. I'm PCT Internet Editor and Managing Editor Brad Harbison. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing from Joe Barile, who's going to be presenting on and sharing some of his tips for successful strategies for managing and eliminating ticks. I think you're going to find today's webinar very timely, as ticks are certainly in the news a lot. They are a growing threat to our public health system. And so Joe's going to share why tick management is a natural fit for pest management professionals, and also he'll provide tips on where ticks thrive, treatment options, and also the benefits of Delta G, which is a proven granule insecticide by Bayer. Again, a little bit more about Joe. A lot of folks in the industry know Joe. He's the technical service lead for pest management and public health for environmental sciences unit at Bayer. And Joe's been involved in the pest control industry for 42 years now. And his unique perspective includes time spent as a pest control technician, technical director, and extension entomologist at the University of Massachusetts. And he's worked on the manufacturing segment of the industry since 1986. One quick note to pass along, today's webinar is interactive, and we encourage everyone to participate. You can ask questions to Joe by instant messaging to us by typing them into the chat box in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We are going to hold all questions until the end so that Joe has enough time to finish. But again, we do encourage everyone's participation. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Joe.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Brad, just want to check. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Joe.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. First, welcome everybody. And one of the first things I want to say is first, my best wishes. Hope everybody is healthy and safe and things are going okay. Crazy times. As you know, it's pretty clear out there. A good topic in regards to being a little pertinent to what's happening. Some weeks back when this thing hit, and I wrote a little column about what's going to happen in regards to pest management. It's pretty clear from watching some of the market data and talking to a lot of friends who are out there in the industry. The residential side of the business is remaining fairly strong, and this is an important residential pest. I think right now people, your customers probably appreciate being healthy and safe at home and being able to use their outdoor living spaces. So this tick management message that we're going to talk about today, I think resonates very, very well. All right, so let's get into it. Brad and I were joking in the warm-up that we've been doing so many of these things, we've lost track of whose platform we're using. Brad said earlier, ticks are in the news, and they have been. And if you've had any kind of interest in regards to public health pest management, it's kind of interesting to watch the papers. The evolution of ticks showing up in the news over the last 10 years has grown every single year. Obviously, one of the key fundamental messages has been the health risk that ticks bring to the public at large out there. Lots of numbers that we can watch. For me, living in New England, close to home, of course, the Lyme disease situation is very important to us. CDC reports typically, well over 30,000 cases annually. Very interesting, though, that if you look back, I think it was 2-3 years ago, they admitted that the Lyme disease infection rates are probably much higher. And part of the problem that they have is that a lot of the healthcare practitioners aren't really familiar with reporting tick-borne diseases. And then even some that are, in areas where Lyme is endemic that do not necessarily report cases. So that number of 30,000 cases, CDC has actually publicly stated it's probably 10 times as large. So that's 300,000 or more cases a year just for Lyme disease. But there's been growth in other tick-borne diseases as well. Certainly in my experience, I've learned to respect this animal quite a bit. And in fact, it's really kind of a filthy little creature when you think about public health. Some other things that are happening is we're watching tick activity spread by species. The Lone Star tick has expanded its native range north from the southern area of the United States up along the East Coast all the way now to Maine, with some sporadic reports of picking a few up in the Canadian Maritimes. Just like we have with mosquitoes, there are invasive species that are coming into the United States. The Asian longhorn tick appeared about 2 years ago. Some people are paying attention to that in New Jersey, where it seems to be pretty common. It's getting established right now. We're not super concerned about the Asian longhorn tick in regards to human disease. Seems to be a tick that prefers larger animals, but we just don't know enough about it and enough about what will happen to this particular tick here. It's certainly the kind of tick that could support pathogenic organisms and then perhaps spread them around. So we'll keep our eyes on that. And probably one of the the key headlines that have occurred in the past couple of years was a tick-borne disease has actually been linked to a very important person's death, and that's Senator Kay Hagan from North Carolina. In fact, her name was attached to a piece of federal legislation to fund the beginnings of what we hope is going to be a national tick research and management policy guided through the CDC and possibly the USDA as well. Brad, if I could have the next slide, please. All right, so what's going on in regards to the increase in public scrutiny, the increase in concerns about public health, and in fact the detection of human disease that has been spread by ticks? Well, I think first and foremost, one of the most important things that's happening, and I have a couple friends who are physicians. We've had discussions about this over the years, is that the diagnostics to detect the organisms that ticks transfer to people to cause these illnesses has gotten much, much better. And in fact, personally, I can tell you, when my kids were born, one of the things that I picked up as being a good dad is I would take care of the kids in regards to all the medical appointments. And when I first met our pediatrician and he found out what I did for a living, he asked me very surprisingly, did I know anything about ticks? We had a discussion about ticks and Lyme disease, and I was really floored, really surprised that this guy had such little knowledge about Lyme, about the transmission of the disease from ticks to people, and in fact, in regards to the whole concept of vector-borne disease in the first place. I can't blame him, as this was back in the mid to late 80s, and Lyme was still, we didn't know an awful lot about Lyme, but diagnostics have gotten better. We're better at detecting these diseases in people, so a lot more of these cases are being reported out there. Our own lifestyle is another reason why we're having more exposure to disease-bearing ticks. First, we're encroaching on the natural habitats of a lot of the host animals, which are involved in maintaining tick populations year to year, moving tick populations around from one location to another. This particular photo you see here, I took in, it was probably 2016, just before I sold the house I was living at the time. This is a fall day up here in Massachusetts, and it was very common for us to have white-tailed deer all through the neighborhood. I used to have the does used to yard up in my backyard in the woods. I'll show you a picture, a little bit more of the property. You can see why they used to hang around out there during the winter. So we don't hunt anymore, or we not many people hunt. These animal populations are exploding, and they are, for all intents and purposes, the transportation engine for ticks. We'll get into that in a little bit. So that's another reason why tick-borne disease has become more of a threat to us in our everyday lives. And then finally, as a culture here in the United States, certainly we've seen an increase in the last 20 years or so of this outdoor healthy fitness type lifestyle. We go into the habitat where ticks occur, where ticks would normally get only on their natural hosts. We bike, we hike, we mountain bike, we hunt and fish. We spend money creating these outdoor living spaces out there. So, personally, each one of us is probably spending more time in an area where we're subject to exposure to ticks than ever before. Okay, next slide, if I could, Brad. So let's take a look at these animals, give a little background. I can't go into great detail today because of the time, or the limited time that I'm going to have on the program. But ticks are ectoparasites of birds, reptiles, and mammals. In fact, it's pretty amazing to when you learn what animals some ticks may feed on out there. Now, ticks are not insects. They're arachnids. They're closest cousins or closest relatives that we're familiar with are probably the mites that are out there, and also spiders and scorpions a little bit. But they are obligate parasites and get all of their nutrition and virtually all of their water, their moisture, from the host animals that they have to complete their life cycle. About 800 species worldwide, give or take, about 80 in the United States, of which probably 10 or 12 are important to us and to our domestic animals. As I said before, new species are being introduced, invasive species, and they probably will be continually as well. The world has gotten to be a small place, as we've learned very recently. Fundamentally, as far as taxonomy, there are two families of ticks out there: the Exotidae, the hard ticks, and the Ergacidae, the soft ticks. Hard ticks are characterized by being able to see their head from above at all stages. Females sometimes, if they're fully engorged, you may not see the head, but for the most part, you can see the head capsule, and the pitulum there, the mouth parts they use to drill into their hosts. Also, there's the presence of a hard plate called a scutum behind their head on the top of their cephalothorax there. It's usually ornate, like you see the tick on the left-hand side. There's coloration in there. Soft ticks, the opposite. You don't see their head even when they're not engorged. Their head structure is held underneath the expanse of the cephalothorax above them. We're not going to talk about soft ticks today. As far as economic and pest management, soft ticks are typically more of an animal health issue. I've had experience with them in poultry and egg laying facilities, that sort of thing. Okay, next slide if we could, please, Brad. All right. Ticks have a different life cycle than a lot of the insect pests that we deal with. There are 4 life stages. Eggs hatch into the first immature stage we call the larva. Larva will find a host, feed successfully, drop to the ground, typically molt into the secondary immature stage, nymphs. Sometimes there's more than one nymphal stage, and then eventually, after successfully feeding on their host, they'll fall to the ground and emerge as an adult and get on a new host to finish the life cycle. Interesting to note that in the larval stage, ticks have only 6 legs, not 8. All right. Easy to confuse a tick larva as an insect because of the fact that it only has 6 legs, but completely different animal. Hard-bodied ticks typically, remember in our world of arthropods out there, there's always exceptions to the rules. And it's true here, the hard-bodied ticks typically have only one nymphal stage. Soft-bodied ticks can have several stages, and those nymphal stages can be extended with more stages occurring if the host animal is not either, the right host animal or it's unhealthy, that sort of thing. Now, each stage typically targets a different host, and as the tick matures, typically the size of the host gets a little larger, and that's what we'll see in some progression when we talk about the more common species. And a tick not only needs a blood meal, but it has to complete its blood meal before they're able to molt and move to the next stage. So it's very similar to what we see in bed bugs. A bed bug who, for some reason, doesn't complete its blood meal can't just skitter home and hope that it has enough calories to molt into the next stage. Same is true with ticks. They have to complete their blood meal before they move on in the life cycle. Okay, Brad, can I get the next slide, please? Now, another thing about tick development in the life cycle is that some ticks have varieties of the number of hosts that they have to complete their life cycle. So as you see here, there's 1 host ticks, 2 host ticks, and 3 host ticks, all right? The 1 host ticks stay on the host that they find initially, if all is well, and they complete their entire life cycle on that 1 host. And the best example that we should have some familiarity with here in the pest management business is the brown dog tick. That's a tick that we're not going to talk about today in detail in regards to management, because that's a tick that becomes an indoor structural pest. So perhaps someday we can talk about that critter a little later out there. 2 host ticks, as it says, they complete their immature life cycle stages on the first initial host, drop off, molt to the adult stage, find the final host to complete its life stage. And you notice the example here. This is, again, one of these exceptions. It's the Pacific or the Western black-legged tick, which is Ixodes pacificus. Very, very similar. It's a close cousin to the Ixodes tick we have here in the east, the black-legged or the deer tick. But this particular tick out west only needs 2 hosts, okay? This tick's a little unusual too. The Western black-legged tick will often use a reptile or a lizard as its initial host. So that's a little different than some of the ticks that we're talking about today. Then finally, the 3 host ticks for each stage, larva to nymph to adult, has to fall off both find and successfully find a new host as we go on. And here you see examples of 3-host ticks, very common to us: the American dog tick, the deer tick, the Lone Star tick, and the Rocky Mountain wood tick. Okay. Next slide, Brad. All right, what about tick development? And remember that because they're obligate parasites, that they have to find these blood-bearing hosts to get all of their nutrition, all of their moisture. They're going to be found in natural environments where their hosts occur. And that's what you see in the top picture. That's the backyard of that property I was showing earlier, the deer. That managed lawn area, the managed turf, that's an environment which typically is, of course, devoid of the host animal activity. And 2, it's a desert as far as the ticks are concerned. It's too warm, too dry, it's too sunny. That's a physical environment that ticks don't like. So where I would start to bump into ticks is right at the edge of my managed turf to where my woodland lot began. Now, that particular property that I used to own was about 55,000 square feet. And between the yard and the house, that was about 40,000 that was woodland out there. I had lots of ticks, lots and lots of ticks out there, believe me. Kind of fun to go out there and quest for them. And where I was most exposed to on my property was if I was working on the edge of the yard. Plus, I had a cart path that went back into the woods where I had a shed and where my compost pile was and where I used to cut up all the branches, et cetera, that I would trim off of the trees on an annual basis. So that was an area that I had to be careful about. Now, ticks in the adult stage, mating occurs on the host. And this is why we always want to have the association between the actions and movements of the host animals. And most importantly, what we're talking about here is the adult tick host. They are the engine that drives the dispersal and, most importantly, the reinfestation that may be occurring on your customers' properties. Now, I believe that if ticks are active on a property and that the host animals are common and active and can be found from year to year, you should be informing your customers that annual tick service, ongoing tick service, should be maintained if they are going to be using their outdoor property at all. Okay. Adult males, when they get on the final host animal, the adult host animal, they tend to grab on and they start to look for a female. Now, typically adult males don't feed, but they may bite for a short period of time to acquire moisture. And then after acquiring that moisture, he'll detach, move around, find the female, mate with the female. And once the mated female, has finished her engorgement, finished her blood meal, she'll drop from that host animal again, wherever that host animal brings it, whether it's your customer's property, the neighbor's property, or wherever. All right. And she'll lay her eggs down in that beautiful leaf litter, that wonderfully organic compost that naturally occurs on the floors of these woodlands and on the woodland edges underneath that scrubby vegetation where it's shaded, where it's moist. And it's pretty amazing that some of these ticks can lay anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousands of eggs. So that's why these tick issues can be pretty serious out there. What you see in that bottom photograph was taken by Kirby Stafford from the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station. We were working together on a project back in the early 2000s. And you see circle, that's a deer mouse. That's a very common host for larval and nymph ticks. You can see a couple of ticks that are circled on there on its ear. It was amazing when we were capturing these animals live to survey and count ticks. Typical deer mouse would have anywhere from 50 to 150 ticks on it. That's a lot of ticks. And a deer mouse that was more than a year old, sometimes its ears would be literally shredded from all the tick activity of them attaching to their ears out there. So they can maintain and support lots and lots of ticks out there in nature. Can I get the next slide, please, Brad? All right, some things to remember. And a lot of this is based on, the wonderful myths and learnings that people pass on that's not necessarily true about ticks. Ticks do not jump. They don't fly. They don't have wings, never have had wings in any fossilized record, nor do they drop from trees. Now, ticks typically look for hosts in a behavior we call questing. When it's time for them to find a new host, they crawl up low vegetation in that tick zone and hang out like you see in the picture of this black-legged tick in the top picture, okay? And they kind of stay there with their legs hanging out, hoping that an animal will eventually come by and they can snag onto it and start their business. There is evidence that these ticks can be stimulated to move up out of the compost, up out of the leaf litter, based on a couple of things. One is temperature, warm temperatures, they move around more. Second is vibration of the host animals moving around. And there's some orientation to carbon dioxide as well, but they're not actively seeking hosts, but they're passively seeking areas where hosts are common, questing in that position. Now, ticks, as I said, like the shaded areas, they're just as subject to moisture loss as insects are, and they tend to stay down in the moist leaf litter and such. There's evidence that they can actually absorb moisture through the micro humidity that exists in these areas to help them survive. As I said before, ticks are not usually found in the middle of a sunny lawn. It's just too dry, too sunny, too much of a desert environment, and hosts just don't come by. Ticks are, again, I said, not aggressive seekers of hosts. They're passive seekers of hosts. And in fact, if you look at that top picture of the black-legged tick, you can kind of barely see some of the hooks that occur at the end of their legs where they can grab onto the hair of an animal. Now, before I go on to this, I do want to say you saw some asterisks there about the Lone Star tick. And again, as an exception, thank you, Brad, the Lone Star tick is a lot more active in moving around, trying to find hosts and such, so he's an exception. Normally, I don't advise PMPs to do broadcast treatments of lawns targeting ticks, okay, because that area really doesn't support them. I think we're putting down too much pesticide in the area where it's not necessary. A little different, though, for you guys in the native range of the Lone Star tick, and if in fact that's either a key or the target tick species out there, you may want to consider applying broadcast to lawns, because Lone Star ticks will move across lawns trying to find an area which is suitable for their host animals that are out there. And I'll show you in a few minutes how you can actually test for that or find these ticks that are out there. Okay, Brad, next one. As we start to talk about tick management, I want to let you know that at Bayer, we've created an exterior tick management protocol. We'd be happy to share a copy of this with you. You can contact your local Bayer area manager, or my email will be on the last slide here, and you can send it to me. And sooner or later, I can't promise overnight delivery, but I will get you a copy of this protocol that's worked very well for a lot of PMPs in the United States. Okay, Brad, next slide, please. Talk a little bit now about some tick management. And it starts with the homeowner. We are actually going to do integrated management, and that means we're going to teach our customers about some of the things on their properties which support ticks and raises the risk of their family, and their pets be exposed to ticks. So we recommend, one is you reduce or eliminate yard clutter that supports the rodent population, those first hosts, the deer mice, the eastern chipmunk, the ground squirrels, and the ground squirrels out west. Things like wood piles that aren't used, lumber piles that stack up from past projects, tires that are left out, old stone walls in disrepair, the clutter that collects around like an outbuilding, like a shed or a pool house. Make sure you get rid of all the leaf litter and stuff that accumulates around them from year to year, because that's the kind of situation which allows those rodents, those first hosts, to thrive. And as such, the ticks have a very good chance of finding a host, and their populations will build as well. We want to trim vegetation along trails and paths along the edge. And what that means is, think a little bit of that tick zone. If you and your family don't go into that tick zone, if you're not exposed to that area, then you're not going to be exposed to the ticks. But nothing's 100%. And like most people in my property, I told you about my cart path that I used to use on a regular basis. I didn't maintain that as landscape, so I was always walking through grass that was higher, brush. I would move through the fringes or the borders of that area and be exposed to the low vegetation and such. And sure enough, I used to find ticks on me. So a good rule of thumb is that if the shed is set back into that tick zone, if in fact they use a compost pile out there. Another thing is, I had a rabbit hutch that was set in the woods. Think about somebody who might be keeping bees and they've pushed the beehives back into the fringe a little bit. That's another area where they have to do some maintenance out there. Certainly trim and keep the lawn well manicured. Again, not to support any tick activity or movement. And I do want to pass along a new piece of research that came out, the Journal of Economic Entomology, I believe this winter, Bob Jordan and his partner, Terry Schultze, down there in New Jersey at the Monmouth County Mosquito Control Project, did a study that showed, and I'm the biggest guilty guy. You know, when I read this, I was like, well, that's me. This explains it. And they indicated that people who rake their leaves and yard debris towards the woodlot and use and dispose of that material along that edge, in other words, along the edge of the maintained property, and just leave that stuff piled up there, had much higher tick populations than people who collected their leaves and their yard debris and took it off property or put it into a central compost area away from the edge of the managed turf. I think that's a very important piece of information we can pass along to the public at large about how they maintain their yards in regards to tick activity. All right, next slide if I can. So let's talk a little bit about some other things we're going to ask our customers to do. And just as we do with flea control, we want to make sure our customers maintain tick management on their pets. All right. It helps a great deal because Rover may be just as responsible for dispersing new ticks into the environment as the white-tailed deer, the raccoons, and the coyotes that are out there. Lots of consumer products that are very, very effective out there: spot treatments, medicated chews, collars. My daughter uses the Seresto collar from Bear on her 3 dogs. Hasn't found a tick on them down there in rural Virginia for a couple of years. Now, if you're confronted with questions that are about these products or about the health of the dogs and cats, remember, we're not veterinarians. Direct your customers to consult a veterinarian if they have these questions. Next slide, if I can, Brad. So let's get a little bit involved now in what we're going to do when we hit the property. The first thing I want to talk about is PPE, but not about what we're applying. Okay, that's on the label. All right, you're obligated to follow those PPE requirements according to the label law. But I want to talk about protecting yourself from tick exposure. And there's 2 ways to do this. You're going to be working in these areas, so you're at high risk of being exposed to ticks. One, you can apply the personal repellents to exposed skin and or clothing. You want to follow all label directions, and typically we're talking about active ingredients like DEET and picaridin. There's a couple other numbered compounds that are in the products now. Please don't rely on some of the home remedies that are out there. And believe me, I've heard it all. Avon Skin So Soft, I don't believe it will do anything against ticks. I like the ones from my cousins down in New Jersey. Garlic infused olive oil, they feel works great. Well, good for them. Okay. I don't believe that's going to do much out there. Also, you can consider treating your clothing, including your uniforms, pants, socks, shoes, with one of the repellent clothing treatments. You see a can. This is just a representative can out there. These are formulations of usually 0.5% permethrin that are applied to fabrics. Very, very effective at keeping ticks off you. If they get on you, they fall off. Before attaching onto you, in some cases, you kill them. This is work that was started many years ago with the Department of Defense in protecting our troops overseas from a number of biting arthropods and ectoparasites out there. I typically do my clothing when I'm in the field, whether it's for work or it's for fishing and hunting. Remember, this repellent is put on when you are not in the clothing. Don't suit up for the day and then spray yourself with this stuff. That's a label violation, as well as being somewhat of a health hazard out there. The other thing is, if you're going to be in an area where ticks are really rampant, it helps to tuck your pants into your socks. I know it makes you look like a gomer or a goofball, but it is very effective from preventing ticks getting onto your skin on your legs and crawling up your legs to attach somewhere on your body. And if it's a bad season, or actually, I think if you're doing this work, regardless of whether it's ticks, whether it's fleas, whether it's just outdoor pest management, barrier, mosquito control treatments, that you should perform a tick check at the end of the day. And when you get back home, is undress in front of the mirror. I know it sounds crazy, but look around and make sure you don't have ticks on you. The reason for this is that if a disease-bearing tick gets on you, typically that tick has to spend at least 24 hours feeding on you to pass along enough of the disease organism for you to become infected. So if you do a tick check every day, even if you find a tick on you, chances are good it hasn't been attached to you long enough to cause some problems. All right, next slide. How about tick monitoring? Yes, you can do this, and this is especially true if you're concerned of whether you've got Lone Star ticks and you need to expand your treatment sites onto more of the managed landscape. You can either purchase them, and you see this particular picture from a company called BioQuip. They're out of California. I love them to death. I buy a lot of stuff from them, and I've bought my tick drags. This is called a tick drag. It's essentially a rectangular piece of twill cloth. There's a dowel that's got the cloth looped over it in the front, and it's attached to a cord, and you do just what you see in the picture. Is you drag it through the habitat, and you can either time it or you can measure it by area. When you're done, you turn it over, and you can see the attached ticks that are on there that were questing, thought you were something, got attached to the drag cloth, and you can look at species, you can look at life stage, and you can count the numbers as you service this home. Very impressive to do with a lot of customers. They don't see this sort of thing, and it's a way that you can make your service look a little bit more responsive to their needs compared to some competitors out there. Okay, the next slide, please, Brad. All right. Now, when we're going to get involved in interdicting tick activity with acaricides, with some kind of direct pesticide treatment, there's passive methods out there, and one of them is the tick tubes. This was the original one, where some guys from Harvard figured this out, where they took permethrin treated cotton, stuffed it into cardboard paper rolls, much like a toilet paper roll or a paper towel roll, put them in those areas where the primary hosts are active, the mice and the chipmunks and the ground squirrels. They collect the cotton as nesting materials, and they get exposed to the permethrin on their bodies. It kills the ticks on them. Okay. Second one is the Deer 4 poster. This is a very elaborate device. You see that picture on the bottom, developed with a bunch of people at the United States Department of Agriculture. What you see there is it's basically a gravity-fed feeding hopper. Center is loaded with cracked corn. Gravity spills the corn into the two-end feeding beds. But for a deer to get to the corn, it has to put its head through an apparatus of these acaricide-treated rollers. They get exposed on their neck and on the back of their jaw and their ears, much like we would treat a dog or cat with frontline, although it's not fipronil. And what they'll do is they'll get these treatments on a regular basis, and it's extremely effective at keeping deer fairly tick-free. The problem with them is this feeding station attracts deer, and wildlife management people don't like these devices. It changes the behavior of the deer. It can increase the population density in some areas. It's also extremely cumbersome to maintain this thing. You're carrying 50-pound bags of corn through the woods to fill these on a regular basis. They're typically used now for maintaining tick control in managed campuses, things like government research campuses, office spaces, sometimes in schools and such, that sort of environment and property. Then finally, what you see in the top picture was what we were involved with, and I was involved with when I first came to bear, is the tick box. What that is, it's a closed, child-resistant, non-serviceable box. This one's opened up for view, and you see the two white bagged bait blocks that are in there. There's no poison in them. This is not a rodenticide. What the bait does is it attracts the deer mouse or the chipmunk or the ground squirrel into the box, and the architecture makes it go down the central corridor where that device you see on the lid overturned. That's a wick system treated with fipronil, and that is essentially you're giving a frontline treatment to wild animals. And you deploy the boxes at each emergent stage, which here in the Northeast where I live, it's two deployments typically in a season. And you keep those host animals tick-free. It's been very, very effective. Unfortunately, due to cost and regulatory issues, we co-developed this with CDC. We had to abandon it. However, a company out of Connecticut maintains the registration, and they were selling the inventory that we had produced as part of their service, and they've done pretty well with it. Okay, so that's the passive treatments. Brad, if I can get the next one, let's talk now more about what we can do on a regular basis, and that's the use of an insecticide that is effective on ticks, so we call it an acaricide. And what we want to do here is you need to understand that ticks are susceptible to a lot of the active ingredients that are out there, but remember, because they're public health pests, the registrant, that is the person who registers or owns the registration, like Bayer, we have to produce the efficacy data that satisfies EPA. So if you're going to treat for ticks, make sure that ticks are on the label. So your target pest, and I strongly recommend your target site is on there as well. All right. And in our lineup, in our portfolio, we have 3 brands of product out there that are both label and effective on ticks. Our Tempered FX product, the combination of midacloprid and beta-cyfluthrin, fast knockdown of ticks, nice residual out there, good strong label for tick management. Our deltamethrin dilutable suspend SC and Polyzone are out there. Again, very effective, good knockdown, long residual of the Polyzone out there. Our value line of products out there, which really were our go-tos in our portfolio up until probably the mid to late 90s, were our Tempo products, Tempo Ultra and Tempo SCWP. The WP, the big packs and the solid water soluble packs were great if you were treating lots of area out there. Okay, next slide if I can, please, Brad. Now, part of the good news with the Acaricides is to date, we've never had problems or reports of tolerance or resistance to the active ingredient. So you can go out with these products with confidence that you're going to do a good job in managing and getting good knockdown and mortality with them. So where we bring these products is we're going to target that tick zone. So again, it's typically into the edge of the managed landscape, off into the woodland, off into that environment. And I use this term a lot when I talk to people about ticks, is follow the mice. Out west, I'd say follow the ground squirrels, follow the chipmunks, etc. If you're in the mountain areas, I want you to follow the wood rats, because where they live is the key harborage site where tick development is going to occur, and that's where you want to make these applications. All right. You want to treat the non-grass ground covers, that is that leaf litter and the natural compost. Also, in managed landscapes, don't forget to look for beds with low ground covers, things like English ivy, Pachysandra, because we know that mice, voles, and chipmunks like to move through there. They will nest in there, and they'll use that for harborage. And as they do so, they'll bring the ticks with them. So don't forget that. Don't just treat the woods per se. Look for those areas as well. As I said before, lawn broadcast treatments typically are not necessary. There are exceptions, though, if you're, like I said before, if you're concentrating on the Lone Star tick. Okay, next slide if I can, Brad. All right, so for our treatments, read and follow all label directions. Okay, remember we have that regulatory obligation to the environment and to non-targets. All right, we're going to target our site. That's that substrate where the ticks develop, where the next time an engorged tick falls off his host animal, he's going to be there, and your active ingredient's going to be there to expose him and kill him. Now, remember your spray volumes, okay? These substrates that we're treating are porous, they're organic, there's lots of stuff going on. So we want to make sure that we get our spray volumes down in sufficient quantity to deliver the amount of AI that's diluted to treat the area that we're treating. Now, typically, most spray treatments, they're going to ask you to mix so many mils or so many ounces in a gallon of water, and that's good for 1,000 square feet. That's the sort of the math obligation we have to do to make sure we're putting the product down. Now, in dry or very heavy vegetation substrates, you may want to consider using higher volumes of water with the amount of active ingredient per 1,000 square feet to make sure it gets down into the substrate, down where the ticks are going to be hiding, okay? And you can do so. Remember, you have to adjust your record keeping, because the percentage of AI in a gallon of solution is going to go down the more that you dilute it, all right? Now, as far as equipment, because we're treating wide areas, hand equipment's a little difficult, but certainly a B&G, you're probably not going to be able to cut it. Guys who are using the lever-operated backpack, the 3-gallon Birchmeyers and similar, you can do it, but remember that obligation to the volume per 1,000 square feet. And you're going to find that a backpack sprayer is probably going to be a fairly heavy time obligation to make sure you get the correct volume onto the area. And you may even have to refill one time, maybe even more, it depends on the size of the property. So that gets a little more cumbersome. I've been asked many times for people who are combining either flea and tick service or their barrier mosquito treatments and tick service. Can I do that? And the answer is yes. The mist blower is 1, label compliant. 2, you can put it down, and you can put your sprays down with the mist blower. You're always cautious, remember, about drift, especially over property lines and such, and you're following your label directions. But again, with a mist blower, one of the things I want you to remember is if you have a lot of area to treat, that tank in that mist blower probably only has 2 or maybe a little bit more gallons. So you have to figure into your time on property that you may have to refill the tank remixed to finish or complete the treatment for the tick control. Okay. All right, next slide. All right. So as an alternative, and this is something I learned when we were doing the tick box works years ago, because we used to do all of our trials with both a control plot and a comparative Acaricide, and what we used were the Delta Gard G contact granules out there. This is really an efficient, effective way to control ticks. Very low profile. You're not carrying a lot of equipment around. You're not dragging hoses through. You're not refilling sprayers on site and such, more to make more diluted spray. The Delta Gard G granule is extremely effective. It's got a nice low dust modern carrier. It goes through the commercially available spreaders, whether a drop spreader, a rotary spreader, handheld, push type, or even the ones that sometimes you see people wearing on their chest. Doesn't clog it up with dust and foul the spreading mechanics. All right, very easy to apply, so it's saving you time and money for time on site and your labor cost. No hoses to drag, no tank refills. Another nice thing about the granules is that there's no defined reentry period, because this is a dry formulation that goes out there. We don't have to tell our customers, you have to wait until the spray dries before you, the kids, the dog, the cat can go back outside. So it's something to consider as a very effective alternate to spray treatment. So can I get the next slide, please? Oh, there's the bag. All right. And the nice thing too is you can stay right there. Thank you, Brad. Is the efficacy of this product, at least when I was doing these trials back in the early 2000s, I was pretty surprised at how efficacious these treatments are. One published piece of data we have out there is in New Jersey. Single application of Delta Gard G at the label rate provided 97 to 100% of control of Ixodes scapularis, that's the deer tick, for 12 weeks post-treatment. This was in New Jersey when we were doing our trials out there, and that's Terry Schultze and Bob Jordan was in that trial as well out there. So you can rest assured that the contact granule, the next precipitation event, or if there's irrigation in the area, it starts to lose over time that deltamethrin. The ticks are exposed. It does an extremely good job out there controlling those ticks long term. Okay, Brad, next slide if I can. All right, and here's our treatment timing. Now, because so many people, I saw the pre-registration list, we got people from all over. I'm going to be a little general in terms. And with our liquid acaricide treatments, if you're doing spray treatments, you want to begin your treatments in the early spring. This is where we want to catch the overwintering stage of the tick as it emerges. Typically with 3 host ticks, this is a nymph from last year, okay? And the rule of thumb is when soil temperatures achieve and maintain 50 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? As a reference, I can tell you we like to start these treatments here in New England, probably in early May. If we have a warm spring, we can back it up a week or two, but early May. Rely on the residuality of your products out there, especially something like Polyzone and Temperate. It will be there as the ticks become active. For our liquids, we want to apply them as long as the label allows at a 30 to 60 day interval, okay, through the season. Apply at the low rate. You don't have to apply at high rate unless you've got a very, very deep, dense, organic substrate, like really deep leaf litter and such, where you know that the ticks are located, all right? And do think about what we talked about before. Consider higher volume dilutions for dry or those other deep litter sites, okay? And you can reach out to us, to your area rep, to find out when the best time to start this service. The other thing is if you have a local extension agent, they'll know exactly when to start those treatments based on when the ticks first emerge and start questing in the spring for their hosts. Okay, Brad, next slide, please. Now, treatment timing for Delta Gard G, again, the same. We want to begin our treatments to catch those early emergers, early spring with those soil temperatures of about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And now, instead of spraying on a regular basis, because we get such good residual out of that Delta Gard G, we want to follow up these applications at the next molt emergence and then finish with a late fall application. And I say late fall because one of the things that ticks can do to kind of trick us up is if we get some warm days after the first frost, overwintering ticks may come out and become active. And your customers may see them, they may get one on them, and they may call in a complaint based on that sort of activity. So I like to do a late fall application with the granules as well. Apply at the label rate, and I would only consider the high range in the application volume, again, for very dry or very deep litter sites. You can stay on the low range for most normal sort of tick substrate leaf litter areas out there. And again, as far as the timing, you can contact your local Bayer rep or again, your extension service to know when you're going to begin your spring treatments and when the next emergence, again, with the 3-stage ticks, what we typically see is the emergence of the larvae in midsummer, okay? Here in New England, we usually talk about last week of June, first week of July, when we start to see both the American dog tick and the black-legged tick start to show up as larvae out there, okay? Next slide. Okay, that's it. There is my email. Should you, one, I don't answer your question, or two, if you want to get a hold of that protocol. Brad, we've got some time, so let's take some questions.
Yeah, great job, Joe. We did get some questions that came in, and we'll go through as many as we can here. Again, you can keep asking those questions while we're doing the Q&A by typing them by instant messaging to us. One of the questions we did have was some folks wanted to get a copy of the presentation. Yeah, we are recording this, and we'll upload a copy to our website, and we'll also provide a copy to Bayer, so you can reach out to your Bayer reps, and they'll get you a copy. Joe, one of the questions we had, you had cited some research talking about greater tick populations and tick issues when folks put their compost piles at the back of their property instead of disposing them. Can you make a treatment to those compost piles? Was the question.
The conditional answer is yes, Brad. Typically, the behavior or the culture that what Bob Jordan was discussing is people tend to rake their leaves to the edge of the lawn and then just sweep them into that woodland border, okay, rather than pile it up, all right? So this is not a defined compost pile unless they remove it and then take it and put it somewhere. If you find that they are actually using the compost pile, and again, you have to communicate with your customer. For instance, I'll go back to the example that I used in my property. I used to take a lot of yard debris, bring it down my cart path about 50 feet into the woods, and that's where I had my compost pile on a bend, so my wife wouldn't see it out the window and complain how awful it looked. But I didn't use that for anything. That was just there, that decomposed on its own. But if someone is somewhat organic minded and they take their leaf litter, they bring it out to the compost pile. Sometimes they have composters out there, or they put this material with, let's say, a kind of a weak fence around it, chicken wire or whatever. They pile it up so it gets warm, decomposes, and then they use that as a mulch. That I would not treat, because you don't want to have people sticking their hands into that stuff if you've applied some kind of Acaricide into it. And generally, in a formal compost situation, you're not going to find ticks there because the mice aren't there. All right. But what Bob Jordan and his cooperators were describing was the usual culture that I was guilty of. Is I would rake my leaves through the lawn right to the edge, and then take my rake and or my blower in some cases, and just right into the woods. Boom, boom, boom. So what you ended up with is this, this aggregation, almost like a dike of all the dropped leaves right on the edge of that woodland area, right in that tick zone. And that creates just an incredibly rich environment for ticks to develop. Their hosts are there, the mice are there, chipmunks are there, the squirrels are there, and you're just refreshing on their behalf this wonderful substrate for them to survive
in. Joe, question we had was, do larvae or nymphs transmit disease?
Good question. Nymphs are typically the stage of tick that infects humans for most of the diseases, the common diseases that are out there, like Lyme, like babiosis, like ehrlichiosis. I can't, because adults don't typically get on people, all right? They don't infect people. They infect the host animal, but in most cases, that host animal, it's a dead end host and is not susceptible to the disease like we are, okay? Larvae, I'm not sure. That's a good question. I've also asked a couple of people when I've been at programs, are disease organisms transferred transovirally to tick offspring? And I've heard mixed responses on that. So I think the jury might still be out. In other words, can an infected female pass Lyme or ehrlichiosis or Rocky Mountain spotted fever organisms to her young? And I've heard mixed answers to that. So I think that's something the jury might still be out on.
Question we had here was, when you refer to an annual tick treatment, what frequency do you recommend in the Midwest?
Well, I talked about the frequencies in the treatments using both liquids and the granular formulation, Delta Gard G. However, what I'm trying to say is, if someone is concerned about ticks and buys tick service today, I think it's if you go out and you do either a drag or you just, you're pretty convinced that they have tick activity on their property, this should be renewed on an annual basis. What I'm saying is, your service is not going to eliminate the risk for a year or 2 years or 3 years or forever. If they have tick activity now, they're probably very, very susceptible to tick activity on an ongoing basis. Those host animals are always going to be there. The host animals for the adult stage are going to be reintroducing ticks as they cross or they're active in your customers' yards. Where I live now, I get coyote visits out back, believe it or not, on a regular basis, and I'm sure they'll be spitting a few adult ticks off of them out behind where I live now.
Joe, question was, has the prevalence of oral treatments for fleas from veterinarians had an impact on tick management?
Well, it has, as far as protecting the domestic animals. If the question is, has it suppressed the population of ticks in the environment? My belief is no. I haven't seen anything published to suggest that or to dispute it. But I can't believe that regular treatment with a Seresto collar or Advantix or the Chews or Frontline or any of those products on the dog and cat is going to cause great suppression on the property.
Joe, a question was, is there a, I'm sorry, give me a second. Yep. Is there a cure for Lyme disease?
Well, the therapy is the administration of antibiotics, and typically it's doxycycline as soon as possible once infected. I can tell you from personal experience, one of my very good fishing buddies, he picked up Lyme in Pennsylvania years ago, was misdiagnosed for years. He was first infected during that period where, diagnostics weren't that good. He was first diagnosed with Bell's palsy. Then they thought he had a stroke. And then finally they picked up on the incident or the possibility of Lyme. He's been treated, but because of the lag between diagnosis and treatment, he typically has an annual, what's the word I'm looking for, relapse, and he'll have to go back on the antibiotic. I've read where people who get Lyme typically will show a positive test, throughout their life. That's a question better answered by a physician. But my feeling is it really a cure, or are you managing that population? And I think it's more of a management. I've got another friend here in the public mosquito control organization here in Massachusetts. He got infected not only with Lyme, but at the same time with babiosis. So he has a lot of problems. He has a lot of chronic problems with these infections, and he's typically he has to go back on his antibiotic regimen on a regular basis. Now, this is scary stuff.
Joe, a question someone had asked for you to kind of expand on your answer about the residual efficacy of Delta Gard G
Yep.
Do you think it depends on the infestation at your customer's property? Some need it every month, some need it every 3 months. The comment was, we follow the label, but do you have any advice for frequency? I'm
Sure.
sorry,
Yep. Yep.
for
Yep.
frequency
So,
application on the Delta Card G. The label is general and not realistic in his
yep.
opinion.
Yep. Um, what I suggested in the treatment directions, I think is probably optimal in regards to efficacy plus the convenience and the value, the cost that you're spending, where you want to put the product out just before the initial emergence in the spring, and then just again before the larval activity, the second molt period that occurs during summer. And then, as I said, I like to do a late fall application to catch these stragglers and try to protect yourself during the those warm pop-up days that we have. Well, up here in New England, we call them Indian summer days. I mean, I was deer hunting years ago, got up to 60 degrees in northern Maine, and I had ticks all over me that day. I was just amazed. Now, you're allowed to treat on a monthly basis. That's fine with the product. The label allows it. The only reason I would lean towards that is if you've really got heavy activity. If you've really got a lot of heavy activity out there, you're going to have to do some monitoring. You're going to have to determine that through some monitoring or some very accurate history reported back from the customer. If you're doing more frequent applications, stay on the low range of the label rate, and you'll be fine. One, you're putting out enough material. Trust the material to do to provide the residual and the control for the period between your service visits. And two, don't waste money applying more product. You can only kill a tick once. All right. So don't think that, if 2 is good, 3 is better, and 4 is best. No, that's not necessarily true. Those labels are written for a reason.
Joe, question was, is Delta Guard only used in the ecotone area for tick management? The photo you showed looked like she was treating the short grass.
Yeah, you caught me. I didn't have a picture of someone doing the Delta Guard G application, and that was a picture of my friend Jennifer from Florida doing a Max Force complete application for ants. But what I wanted you to see was the hand spreader, which is very common. You can buy these anywhere. Your authorized distributors have similar equipment as well, and just how easy it is to utilize these contact granules like Delta Guard G to do these applications. So good catch out there. I don't know who it was, but that was a good catch.
Joe, I'll give you this one sort of a two-parter. The first one, somebody was commenting about the question previously about the larvae. Let me go back to that. Let me do that one first. The comment was, adults definitely get on people and transmit disease. Larvae do not transmit Lyme.
So. Okay. All right. All right.
Okay. And then the other question was, does Bayer recommend that technicians offer tick monitoring via flagging or dragging as part of their service?
I showed you that because it's so rare that I see a pest management professional do it. And I think it is very effective, and it has value both for the PMP and the customer. All right. The reason being is, we monitor all the time, and monitoring is part of an IPM program. How do you know what's going on with the cockroaches? We utilize bait stations with non-toxic baits to determine rodent activity in food plants. Wouldn't it be wonderful we could finally get a reliable bed bug monitor out there? Well, the same can be true for tick control, and there is a methodology. It's not exclusive to researchers. It's not exclusive to, wildlife management people, forest rangers and such. There's no reason why pest management professional can't do this. It's simple to do, only takes a couple of minutes, and it's a great way to demonstrate a before and after, if you will, in a service to make your customer feel they're getting full value from the service out there.
Joe, a question we had was, will a typical mosquito treatment using power sprays be effective in controlling ticks?
It's all about targeting and volume, Brad. We're going to do a barrier treatment for mosquitoes, typically off the ground, on the foliage, on the surfaces, where mosquitoes will land and rest during the day. That's our target site. That's where that target pest lands, okay? If I just do a barrier treatment, then no, I'm not going to get very much tick management contribution out of that application, because I'm not getting active ingredient down into the harbor's site where the tick is going to be. So if I'm going to do a combined service, I have to remember to be effective in my mosquito barrier treatment, get my polyzone up where the mosquito is going to land, but I also have to physically move down, and I have to apply my polyzone, my product, down onto that tick substrate in that tick zone and target the site effectively.
Joe, the last question we have for you was, with the granules, how about a client with chickens? Is that a concern?
Well, if they're spread correctly, the hazard to poultry is very, very low. What I would not recommend is if you see people with either penned or semi-contained areas. I have a problem applying the product there. The example that I have, and this is from personal experience, are guinea hens. Actually had a situation back when I was a tech director, and somebody had guinea hens. We went out and looked at it. He was concerned about ticks. There's sort of an old myth about the guinea hens will get rid of all the ticks, and that's not true. But he wanted us to treat inside their enclosure, and we had to have a long discussion why, although the risk was small, I was very, very uncomfortable with it, and I think it probably even gets close to a compliance issue with the label of most products. So my recommendation is, if they're penned, no. If they're free range, they're probably not spending a lot of time in that tick zone. They're probably going to be running around in areas where they're going to get insects on the lawn and such. Again, if you stick to the rates, the risk should be low.
All right. Well, hey, Joe, that's all we had as far as questions go. But again, I want to thank everyone for tuning into our webinar today. And again, if you do want another copy of it, we'll have it posted on PCT's website, and we'll also provide a copy to Bayer so you can contact your rep and get it from them. So before I sign off here, I'm going to kick things back to Joe if you want to kind of pass along a final word.
Yep. Thanks for everybody. If the great questions. I appreciate your time and attention. Stay safe, and I hope you have a productive summer out there. Thanks, Brad, for the help.